Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So let's start. So any questions from last time? Okay. So let's continue our discussion about the geometric interpretation for SVMs, and then I'll show you the probabilistic interpretation, and then we'll see how these two are more or less the same. Okay. So if I give you again our setting as usual is that you're given data, and for this discussion we're just going to assume labels as being +1, -1, and then we'll also talk later about how to do the same kind of extension to multi-class like we did before for logistic regression. Okay, but for our discussion here we're just simply going to do the assume that y is +1, -1. So last time I told you this this fact. I hope you got a chance to go and prove it for yourself, that if I give you a weight vector W and an offset B, if I give you a hyperplane which is specified by this W and B pair, then the hyperplane is given by the set of all points x such that W dot x plus B is equal to 0. Okay, so this is the definition of the hyperplane. And if you want to look at the distance of any point x from the hyperplane, then the distance can be computed by using W dot x plus B over the norm of W. Okay, so this was a fact, and we looked at, and I asked you to go and try and prove this. So if a point lies on the hyperplane, then of course the distance is equal to 0 because it satisfies this condition. If the point is outside of the hyperplane, then this is how you compute the distance. Okay, so this is basically, if I give you this plane, if I give you this point, this d of x is simply this distance. Okay, and now if I give you a set of data, say these x1 to xm points, then I'm going to say that the distance, the min over I of say d of xi, I'm going to call this the margin. Okay, so what does the margin simply say? The margin simply says, if I give you a cloud of points, find me the point that is closest to the hyperplane and look at its distance. Okay, so that is what the margin is saying. Of course, if there is a point which lies on the hyperplane, then its margin is equal to 0. Okay, and the other thing that we talked about last time is that there is an inherent non-identifiability problem when it comes to looking at W and B, right? Because if I gave you this W and B and somebody else gave you some lambda times W and lambda times B, where lambda is a positive constant, then this set does not change. So the hyperplane specified by this and this are exactly the same, right? So you can verify that for yourself. So therefore what we are going to do is we are going to get rid of this identifiability problem by requiring that the min over I, when we're given our data, we're going to require this. Okay, this is an arbitrary choice. So we are just going to say that when we are given our data, we are going to get rid of the identifiability by just setting this to be equal to 1. It could be any constant. One is just arbitrary, but you could in general use any constant. Okay, so this is our background, and this is these are just some geometric facts. Okay, so the first geometric fact is that the plane cannot be identified, so you have to put some restriction on the plane. The second thing is that if you want to compute the distance of a point from the plane, you have to use this. Okay, this is the two geometric facts we need. Now let's see how to use these geometric facts in order to classify this set of points. Okay, so what I'm interested, or what I'm going to again make an assumption, and this is a simplifying assumption, and we will relax it in a little bit, is that I'm going to assume that the points x1 to xm with the labels look like this. So there's basically they come from two separate classes. Okay, so this is all the +1 points and this is all the -1 points, and there is an easy way to separate them by using a linear hyperplane. Okay, so this is a linear separability assumption. I'm going to make this assumption to begin with, and then I'll relax it. Okay, so for now I'm just going to make this assumption. So what this assumption says is that there is a hyperplane. Okay, this hyperplane may or may not be unique, but there is a hyperplane which can separate these 2 points. Okay, in fact, you can always show that unless there is some pathological solution, there are infinitely many hyperplanes. Okay, so there are some, you can think of some really pathological situations where this does not happen, but in general there will always be, if the data is linearly separable, there will be infinitely many hyperplanes which will separate the data. Okay, so now what does this, so let's first try to understand, and then we are going to make this assumption, right? So the min of w dot xi plus b is equal to 1. So in other words, because this hyperplane, these points are linearly separable, it means that the points from the +1 and the -1 class are going to lie away from the hyperplane, and therefore what we are saying is that if you look at this distance or this distance, okay, as computed using w xi plus b, then that is equal to 1. Okay, so that's what we are going to say. Either the min of these two distances is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so how do we? So what we can now say is that among all these hyperplanes, right? So as you can imagine, there are multiple different hyperplanes that exist, which may still satisfy this condition. This w dot xi plus b equals 1. Okay, so there can be potentially infinitely many hyperplanes which can satisfy this condition. Among these hyperplanes, which hyperplane do I need to choose, right? Or which hyperplane is the right one? Okay, one way to choose that hyperplane, or one guidance towards choosing such an hyperplane, is to say, let me look at this distance, right? So let me look at this distance and this margin and say I want to find the hyperplane where the margin is maximized. So why does it make sense to maximize the margin? See, if you see, the margin is a min over I of the distances. So it is saying that I want the point which is closest to me, right, from the hyperplane to be as far away as possible. So it's like a minimax thing, right? So you are saying that you take the guy who is closest to you, whose margin is closest to you, and you try to push that apart. So in other words, you are trying to be as non-committal about your decision boundary as the data permits, right? So they are saying that I want these to be as far away as possible. So this is the intuition. So you are trying to say you want to separate the points and you want to be as non-committal about the way you separate the points. Okay, so how do you do that? One way to do that is to say, okay, what that means is that I'm going to take my margin and I'm going to maximize it. Okay, now you know that this is true. The min over I of w dot xi plus b is equal to 1, and you know that the margin is the min of this quantity. So therefore you can say I am interested in maximizing 1 over norm of w, right? And if I maximize 1 over norm of w, that is equivalent to saying that I will minimize the margin, maximize the margin by taking this, because the margin is just defined by w dot xi plus b over the norm of w, but we know that the w dot xi plus b is always satisfying this constraint. So therefore equivalently I can just simply do this. Okay, but while I am doing this, what am I interested in, right? So I am not interested in a hyperplane which looks like this. Correct? If I give you +1 -1 point, I am not interested in a hyperplane which looks like this. Why? Because I want that all the points which are +1 should lie on one side of the hyperplane, and all the points which are -1 should lie on the other side of the hyperplane. Okay, so this is what I want, that these 2 points this cloud of points should lie on one side and that cloud of points lies on the other side, so that whenever a new point comes, I can immediately classify by saying, oh, if it lies in this part, then it must be a plus point, if it lies in this part, it must be a minus point. Okay, that's my, after all, that's my overall goal. So how do I ensure that all points which are +1 are lying above the hyperplane, right? So that is simply to say that if yi equals +1, then I require that w dot xi plus b is bigger than equal to 0. right? So because you see, these are set of points which are which is w dot xi plus b equals 0. That's the hyperplane. Anything above this half space is w dot xi plus b is bigger than 0, and the bottom half space is simply if yi is equal to -1, then this implies that w dot xi plus b must be smaller than 0, right? So what I'm saying is I want to maximize the margin subject to these two constraints, right? Such that if yi is equal to +1, then this must be true, and if yi equals -1, then this must be true. Okay, this is what I want to do. Okay, now you know that w dot xi plus b also satisfies this condition. You enforce this condition. So you can actually in fact say a stronger thing or require a stronger thing by saying that this must be this, right? Because the this is the absolute value of w dot xi plus b is at least 1. If the absolute value is at least 1, then it must be that w dot xi plus b must be larger than or equal to 1, and in this case if yi is -1, then this must be that this is less than or equal to -1, because the absolute value is at least 1. Okay, so if you put these three things together, then you are saying I want to maximize this 1 over norm w subject to these two constraints. Okay, I can now combine these two constraints in one by saying that I want yi times this is bigger than or equal to 1, and you can see that these two constraints are exactly equivalent. I don't need this condition anymore. Okay, so I am maximizing the margin subject to this constraint. Okay, I mean it's clearly all that that's being said here is that w dot xi plus b has the right sign. It's either +1 or -1. If it is, I mean it's plus or minus. If yi is plus and this is plus, then plus times plus is plus. If this is minus and that's minus, then minus times minus is still plus. Okay, and then the absolute value must be bigger than 1. Okay, this can be 1, 42, 34, nobody cares, but this is just a constant. Okay, and this maximization I can now also remove. I can also replace by saying I actually want to minimize, because usually minimization is easier. So I can just do this. Okay, and the 1/2 just simply you add as a constant just because it makes the math easier. Otherwise, there's no real reason for adding a 1/2, right? So instead of maximizing 1 over norm of w, you just minimize 1/2 norm w square subject to this constraint. Okay, and this is your optimization problem, and this optimization problem is called the hard margin SVM. Okay, so support vector machine. So we'll talk a lot more about what are support vector machines and their properties. But before we do that, I want to derive exactly the same optimization problem, but completely through probabilistic arguments, right? So far this is completely geometric arguments, right? So there is nothing probabilistic about this whole discussion. It's all simply saying you are given some points, you are finding the distance of the point to a hyperplane, you are assuming that the hyperplane there's linear separability and so on and so forth. Now I want to derive exactly the same equation or the same optimization problem, but by going through a probabilistic route. And I also want, when we go that route, I also want to point out to you the close connections between logistic regression and support vector machines and how they are related. Okay, and again, many people would want you to believe that they are not, but in fact they are very, very closely related. So any questions about this part? Okay, so now let's do the probabilistic, and I'll leave the equation there, and then we'll try to derive exactly the same equation through the same optimization problem through the exponential families. Okay, so let's again have the same setting. You have the data as before, yi comes from +1 -1 as before. Okay, so if you remember what we did in our probabilistic setting, right? So we said we are going to assume that P of y condition on x and theta comes from the exponential family. So we are going to say this is phi of xy times theta minus g of theta condition on x. Right? So this was our modeling assumption. We said that we are going to assume that the conditional distribution comes from the exponential family, and furthermore, what we are going to assume is we are given this data, and so we are going to say p of y condition on x and theta is going to be proportional to p of theta times p of a condition of p of yi condition on xi and theta. Okay. So now, if you look at this this expression, and as before, let us do the same. So let's take a negative log likelihood and write it out. So if you write the negative log likelihood, the objective function that you got, remember our discussion that we had for logistic regression. Here the j of theta is simply, I'm going to take the negative log likelihood is j of p of theta minus summation I going from 1 to m of the log of p yi condition on xi and theta. Okay, and then I'm going to assume this is an isotropic Gaussian like before, and if I assume an isotropic Gaussian as before, this is just 1/2 norm theta square minus summation of the log of p of yi condition on xi and theta. Correct? So this should be fairly familiar to you, and this is what we were doing before in logistic regression. Okay. Now let us take this objective function and let's ask ourselves the following question, right? So what we are doing here is that we have some regularizer. So the regularizer we are not so interested in, but this part simply says find for me a theta which maximizes the probability of yi. Okay, condition on xi. So if you think about it, for every, then there are two possible values of yi. This is -1 and +1, and there are, this is the probability mass. So the sum of these two should be 1. Okay. If it is multi-class, again there will be many, and the sum of them should be 1. Okay. So what we are saying is that find for me a theta such that at the x's, at the data points that I observed and where I know the labels, the probability of the true label must be much higher or must be pushed higher as compared to the other labels. Okay, and that is what it means to say that I am going to maximize my log probability. Okay, or log conditional probability. But instead you can say I am not just interested in that. Actually, what I am interested in is the following thing, right? So why do you want to do this? So if you think, take a step back and think for a minute. Why is it that you want to push the probability, the conditional probability of the true label higher compared to the other label, the false label? Why is it that you want to do it? Because you know that eventually when you are going to predict, you are going to predict by taking the argmax over all y of, so if you, so your over y from this set of p of y condition on x and theta, right? So if I give you an x and ask you predict for me the label, you are going to compute this p of y condition on x and theta for all possible values of y, find the maximum one and predict that. Okay, so therefore it makes sense to say, okay, the true where I have observed data, it must be the case that the true label must be pushed up, right? The probability of the true label must be pushed up. Okay, but now you can ask you can say, but why should the true label be pushed up? The reason the true label must be pushed up is because I want to discriminate the true class away from the other classes, right? So I want to say that the true class has a much better probability distribution or a much better conditional probability distribution than the other classes. So then you can ask the question, why don't I directly enforce this condition? So what is it that I am interested in? I am interested in actually saying that p of yi condition on xi and theta over p of y condition on xi and theta, okay, for all y not equal to yi, okay, this quantity must be large. Right? So if I have some constant eta, let's say, then I am going to say that this p of yi condition on xi and theta must be larger than eta times any other probability. the same visualization if you did in multi-class, then you could say here are all my different probabilities, this is how they look like. Okay, and let's say if I have one class, so let's say these are class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so suppose I have 6 classes. Okay, now it may be the case that this guy, okay, and this guy both have almost similar weights. Okay, and maybe these all the other classes have very negligible weights, let's say. Okay, so let's say between these two there are about like 0.99% of the probability masses in these two weights. What will happen is that when you're suppose this is the true label. Okay, so then what will happen is that in this formulation you will be happy because you'll say, okay, the weight for 3 is high enough, it's like close to 0.5. Okay, but that alone is not sufficient, because actually what is happening is while the weight for 3 is close to 0.5, the weight for 6 is also reasonably close to 0.5. And so later when you are trying to predict, you may have some sort of confusion between 3 and 6 and you may not be able to figure out which one is which. Instead what this is saying is that what I really want is that the probability, the weight for 3 must be high, but not only must the weight for 3 be high, I want to suppress the weights for everybody else. So I really want to push everybody else down. Right? I want to suppress the weights of the other guys. So it's a sort of more, it's a more capitalistic way of thinking and saying that I want to rise up, but at the same time I want the others to go down. Versus this is a more socialist way of thinking, saying that I want to rise up, I don't care about the other guys. Okay? So, and this in some sense makes is sort of the philosophy, right? So you say, I really want myself to be high, but I also want the other guys to be low. Or you can say this is the same as this y not equals yi. Okay, so for all possible classes, this must be true. If this is true for all possible classes, it must in general be true for max of y not equals yi. Again, because we are working with the exponential family, if you look at this expression, let us write it out. Okay, so how does this expression look like? This is exp of phi of xi yi times theta minus g of theta condition on xi over max of y not equals yi of exp of phi of xi yi times theta, xi y minus g of theta condition on xi. Okay, this cancels because there is the same constant factor in both of them. Okay, and you can rewrite this expression as exp of phi of xi yi times theta minus max of y not equals yi of phi of xi y times theta. Okay, it must be bigger than or equal to eta. Or I can get rid of the x by taking a log on both sides, and let's just call this some other constant. And in fact, I'm just going to choose again arbitrarily. I'm going to choose this to be equal to 1. Okay, it doesn't matter. I can choose it to be a constant. I'm going to choose this constant to be equal to 1. Okay, so now what you're saying is that if I look at phi of xi yi times theta, this is, you remember this, the sign of this was a prediction. Okay, so you're saying that if I look at this quantity, this must be at least larger than next quantity. Okay, for any other class by at least 1. The same as saying that the probability here, probability by eta factor. They are equivalent statements. Okay, and now let us specialize. So far this discussion is simply for any class, like multi-class, multi-label, it doesn't matter. This is the same discussion. Okay, now you can actually specialize this discussion for just +1 -1. Okay, so I'm going to specialize this discussion by assuming that phi of xi yi is equal to y over 2 phi of x I. Okay, so I'm just going to make this assumption. I'm going to come up with a particular kind of a feature map. Right, so I'm going to say phi of xi yi for when yi comes from +1 -1. So if for the binary case, I'm going to assume this. Okay, If I make this assumption, then what happens? See, this is if this is yi over 2 phi of xi times theta minus, what is the other label? If the true label is yi, then the false label must be minus yi, right? Because if the true label is +1, the false label is -1. The false label is -1. The true label is if the true label is -1, the false label is +1, right? So which is the same as minus yi over 2 phi of xi times theta, and this, if I combine the two, just becomes yi phi of xi times theta must be larger than 1. Okay. So now if you take this condition and say, okay, I am not interested in maximizing the log likelihood, but I am interested in enforcing this condition, which is the same as enforcing this condition, then what happens? My objective function becomes j theta is equal to 1/2 norm theta square, okay, subject to the condition that this is satisfied. See, I am replacing the log likelihood by this condition, right, which is okay. And now compare these two. Okay. Except for the presence of a term, this offset term, okay, you can also incorporate an offset here, but the argument becomes a little bit more takes a little bit more involved. But except for the presence of an offset, compare this optimization problem with this optimization problem. Okay, they are exactly the same. No geometry, nowhere. Completely probabilistic. Okay, start with an exponential family. You say, I am not going to do the log likelihood, which everybody does. I am actually going to do a more discriminative way of enforcing the constraint. I am going to be more discriminative about how I obtain my probabilities. So I am not only going to push my true probability up, I am going to push the other probabilities down. If I do that, then the optimization problem is exactly the same. Okay. So now you see the difference between logistic regression versus SVMs simply comes from the following fact. In logistic regression, you directly maximize the log likelihood. In SVMs, you minimize a discriminative version of the log likelihood. Right? So you do this, you say you are going to suppress the other classes. Now once you understand this, it also allows you to go and design multi-class, true multi-class support vector machines, because you do exactly the same thing. You remember how we did multi-class for logistic regression? We simply said we are going to design a feature map for multi-class, right, and do this. Exactly the same handle cranking you can do here, and exactly you will get a constraint which looks like this, right? So you will have a constraint which looks like this, okay, and is exactly the same handles. You crank exactly the same handles and get exactly the same results. In fact, you can be more smarter than this and say, I am not just going to make this constant eta, okay. I'll give you an example where having a constant eta separation may not be the optimal thing to do, right? So let me give you an example. Suppose you are predicting an ontology, okay. So let us say this is something like hardware, and this is software, and then here is some mouse and keyboard, and here, I don't know, this is Windows, and this is Unix, okay. So let's say this is some ontology, and you have to predict. So I give you some document, and you have to predict which leaf node it belongs to, right? So whether it belongs to Windows, whether it is talking about Windows, Unix, or it's about a mouse or a keyboard, okay. So let's say it's a very simplified cartoonish example. In this case, what may happen is that if your true label is say mouse, okay, you really don't want to confuse it with something that talks about software. But it's okay, maybe it's not that bad to say, okay, the keyboard, sometimes I don't mind confusing things with that because it's reasonably close in concept. So in this case you can say, I don't want to push everybody, every false label away from me by a uniform margin, I want this margin to depend on the distance between, so for all y not equals to yi, I want this. So I'm going to define some notion of a distance in my label space. I'm going to say that these two labels are close or far away. If they are far away, then I want this to be much further away. If they are close by, I don't mind this ratio being small. Right? If I do that, then here again there will be another thing that happens. So you'll get some kind of delta prime of yi. Okay? And if you go along this path, right, and you say, okay, my label distances are going to vary according to the labels themselves, then you get into structured prediction. Okay, structured prediction, conditional random fields, they're all based on this notion, that where your label space has some notion of distance, and if you endo your label space with that distance, then you are saying that this quantity must be at least this delta prime. So if their label space distance is large, then this must be separated by a larger margin. If the label space is small, then it must be separated by a smaller margin. Okay. In multi-class, you may just simply set this again to be a constant, but in other cases like this ontology, you may set this to be some delta. Okay, so this leads you down the line of structure prediction. We unfortunately don't have as much time to go down the entire path, but I just want to give you a flavor for how this whole thinking is powerful enough to lead you to different places. So sort of, if you really understand the essence of this arguments, you can just go off on your own and try to model your own problems by using the same sort of thinking. Okay, so that's what I want to give you, rather than just having a number of lectures on structured prediction. Okay, clear? And also I hope it's very clear to you the sort of connection, the similarity and the dissimilarity between logistic regression and SVMs, and why when you read many papers, the difference in performance between logistic regression and SVMs is not that large. But usually SVMs do slightly better than logistic regression, and the reason is, in some sense, they're doing the right thing. They're not saying, I'm not only interested in pushing my own label, but I'm interested in suppressing the other labels as well. And when you do that, you get slightly better results, but usually they're not all that different. Okay? So this is the connection that I wanted to point out, and then last time I showed you how logistic regression is related to naive Bayes. So all these different algorithms that you see, they all have connections. They are all related to each other. They're all parts of the same elephant. Okay? We just touch and feel different parts of them. Questions?
Eta, right?
Uh-huh.
Even in two-class, can you have two different eta which say one kind of error is more costlier than the other?
Yes, you can, right? So you can say that I want to ensure that if when yi is equal to +1, I want to have a different eta. When yi is equal to -1, I want a different kind of eta. You can do that. Again, depending on your error, and all of that is encapsulated here, right? So you can do y times yi. Usually you wouldn't do it unless there is a strong reason to believe that one type of error is more expensive than the other. But if you have such a problem, then sure, you will do that. Okay?
This kind of pushing the other classification. So does that mean that this is more susceptible to noisy labels than
The other way around. Logistic regression is more susceptible to noisy labels, and you can indeed, you can in fact prove that. That there is a certain notion of robustness which you can specify, which says that as you get one, so actually in fact both of them are susceptible to those kind of errors, and basically if I give you one point which is mislabeled, okay, but if I take the mislabeled point and send it to infinity, then the solution completely changes. And in fact, you can show that you can make both of them arbitrarily bad in that notion of robustness. Okay? But for noisy labels, in fact, logistic regression suffers more, right? Because you don't have this suppressing effect, and that seems to somehow affect it a lot more. That's just empirically, but also theoretically you can show that both of them are not susceptible to noise in a certain way. Other questions? Okay.
In noisy, instead of taking maximum, you can take some group of point.
Okay, yeah, okay. So this is a very good point. Okay, so let us, yeah, this is a very, very good point. Let me comment on this. Okay, so again, this may seem a little bit too extreme, right? So you're saying what you're doing is you're taking p over the max of p, and this may seem a bit extreme to you. So you may say, oh, why are we doing this? This seems a lot more, a little bit hard to digest. Okay, but now let us do the following thing. Let's actually look at the SVM, the logistic regression, and write out this guy. Okay, so how does this look like? The log of p of yi xi looks like this, right? Remember, phi of xi yi times theta minus g of theta condition on xi. And this is how the log of p of yi xi condition on xi theta looks like, correct? Because of this is the assumption. Now let's look at what is the definition of g of theta condition on x. Okay. So let's replace it with the definition, which is the log of the sum of x phi of xi y times theta. Okay. Now let me give you this, and you go and try this at home. Suppose I give you a set of numbers. Okay, so let's say I give you some m numbers or n numbers. Okay, so let's say I give you n numbers. They're just some random integers or whatever, and you compute log of sum of x of ai going from 1 to n. Okay, so this will give you a number because ai's are all numbers, so you do a log of sum of x, we'll get some number. Okay, now multiply them all with lambda and divide them with 1 over lambda. Okay, so in some sense you have not really done anything, right? You have pushed a lambda in there and you have pushed a lambda outside. So it's like, you raise x by the power of lambda, but then you take a log and then you divide by 1 over lambda. So in some sense it's not so large, not such a big deal. And you take the limit, lambda goes to infinity. What do you expect to see? Anybody remember the limits? Why would it go to 0?
1 over lambda part will go to 0.
Yeah, but the log of this will not go to 0, right? So intuitively, what do you expect to see? Make a guess. Sorry? 1, no. This limit actually converges to this quantity. You can verify that. Sorry? Is the max over this will converge to the max. Because intuitively what will happen is that you can take the max and then write everything as x of lambda max of ai minus ai, right? And then all the other terms will cancel out and only one term will remain. So basically the trick is to rewrite it as follows. So this will be the x, let's call this max of ai a star, then this is basically becomes lambda times a star minus ai, okay, summation log 1 over lambda, and then you'll see that this quantity will be positive for everything which is not where the max is not attained, and then this 1 over lambda log will cancel out, and then there will be only one term remaining where this A star is equal to AI, and then that term can be pulled out. So you can verify this. This is a neat little exercise in limits. Okay. So therefore, this quantity, the log of the sum of the exp of numbers. So if I give you any set of numbers, and if you compute log sum exp of AI, this quantity is often called the softmax. This is not quite the max, but what will happen is the large numbers will influence it more than the small numbers. Okay, so the large numbers will have a much larger influence than the smaller numbers. Okay, and in the limit, this becomes the max. Okay, so another viewpoint of relating SVMs to logistic regression is to say you take the log likelihood, but then you replace this log partition function by a limiting function. Right? In the limit, this log of the sum of the x, which is the softmax of phi of xi y times theta, will go to the max. So what will happen when you take the limit is this will become max over okay, and that is related again to this. Although the margin doesn't appear in that argument, but so you have to do a little bit more work. I mean, so the reason there is because again we are not explicitly enforcing a margin, but at least in terms of the objective function, this is what is happening. Okay, so this is another way to think about it, as a limit of this objective function is this constraint. Okay, that's another connection. Good. So other questions about robustness, relations? Okay, this is something that you don't see very often because I don't think that many people understand it. Okay, they don't quite realize how similar these two things are. Okay. Questions? Okay. So now let's actually move on and say, so we made the simplifying assumption that things were linearly separable. Okay, I just want to leave this here because we'll come back to this in just 1 minute. Everything else I can erase. Okay. So we made this assumption about how the points were linearly separable. Okay. Now let's try and relax that assumption. Okay. So if you try and relax that assumption, then if you try and relax the assumption that the points are not linearly separable, then you no longer require that yi w dot xi plus b is strictly larger than 1. You actually require that this is larger than some 1 minus psi I. Okay, psi I is called a slack. Clearly you don't want psi I to be negative. Okay, because if psi I were negative, then you are actually making your life harder. So you want psi I to be positive or non-negative. And of course, if you did not penalize psi I, then I could take psi I and let it go to infinity, and I'd get a solution. Okay. So now I am going to do the following thing. I'm going to penalize psi I, and I'm going to place some factor front. Okay, saying that how much psi I costs, and now psi I also becomes an optimization variable. Okay, psi becomes an optimization variable. So this is called a soft margin SVM. So all I have done is I have taken the logical steps of saying that I don't quite require this to be exactly happening. This cannot be non-negative, and I have to penalize it. Of course, there is no reason that I should only penalize psi I. There are some formulations where you can penalize some square norm of psi I and other norms of psi I, but we won't go there. Okay, so they all lead to a number of other formulations, but we won't have time to discuss all of them. But again, just be aware that you can penalizing the sum of psi is not the only way. You can also penalize the sum of squares, sum of p norms, but when you do sum of p norms, then the problem becomes non-convex. But for sum of psi i's and the sum of squares of psi i's, it still remains convex. Okay. Now this thing is called a soft margin SVM, and there are a number of properties of this soft margin SVM which we will discuss. So let me first do one thing to show you again connections to the to what we were doing there. So what I can do is I can take these two constraints and rewrite them as follows. Okay, I can rewrite them as psi I must be larger than max over 0 1 minus yi w dot xi plus b. Okay, everybody see why this is a valid rewrite? Because either psi I must be larger than 0 and psi I must be larger than 1 minus yi w dot xi plus b, correct? So which means that if it is larger than both of them, it must be larger than the max of these two. Okay, and since here I have a summation of psi I, so I can in fact replace this constraint, remove the constraint and add it in, because I know that psi I is larger than the max of these two quantities. Suppose when I am doing my optimization, I set, suppose somebody gives you a solution which is this. Right, so is the max of these two plus some epsilon. Okay. Suppose somebody gives you a solution which looks like this. Clearly, you can set the epsilon to 0 and get a better solution, right? Because you remember you are minimizing with respect to w and psi. So if somebody gave you, say, this quantity was 1 and then somebody added a 0.5 and gave you a solution which was 1.5, you could always remove the 0.5 and remove 0.5 from your objective function. So therefore, at the optimum, psi I must be equal to the max of this. Now you know that the psi I is equal to the max, I can actually replace it here, and I can now say my objective function is min over w of 1/2 norm w square plus c times summation max of 0 1 minus yi w dot xi plus b. Okay, and I want you to compare this with this. Okay, they have the same structure, and in fact, let's specialize this for the logistic regression for 2 class. If you remember, for the 2 class, this specializes to plus summation log of 1 plus x of 5 times xi theta times y. Correct? This was how it specialized for the 2 class. So I want you to contrast this with this. Okay, what does this have? There is a common structure, right? So there is this 1/2 norm square, there is a regularizer, and there is a regularizer. Okay, and then here there is a summation. The same thing, there is a summation. Okay, here. The only difference is in this part. This is different from this. Okay, so this is called the logistic loss, and that is called the hinge loss. If you plot this quantity and that quantity, okay, so if you plot this as a function of this w dot xi plus b times yi, if you plot this, the hinge loss looks like this, and the logistic loss looks like this. Okay, they are both convex, and they are in fact very, very closely related. Again, we saw connections, but this also points out to more connections. Okay, the hinge loss has one issue, which is a significant issue, which is it is non-smooth at this point. It has a kink. Okay, the logistic loss is smooth. It does not have a kink. So therefore, the optimization problem for logistic regression actually turns out to be smooth. but the optimization problem for support vector machines, SVMs, actually turns out to be non-smooth. Okay? And that causes a lot of headaches. We'll see some of them. But again, I want you to see the differences. And in fact, this structure that there is a regularizer, there's a summation of a loss over individual points, is something that is very, very, very common in machine learning. Right? You'll see this in multiple instances. In fact, some people would argue that your job in machine learning is literally just to design this loss function. Okay, and then just plug in a regularizer, plug in a summation of loss functions over individual data, optimize it, and you're done. Okay, and sort of the whole game is just designing good loss functions. Okay, but I mean that's one view of the world. It's not the only view of the world, but that's one view of the world. Okay. Questions? Good. So we have a few choices now. I can go through the computing the dual of this quantity, of this optimization problem, using the Lagrangian and so on and so forth. Or we could just assume that this is the dual and then go ahead with other things. Go ahead with optimization. How would you prefer? We have 10 minutes today, but we can come back to it on Tuesday. So do you want to see more how to solve the problem, or do you want to see how to derive the dual first before you see how to solve the problem? So how many of you have seen the derivation of the dual before? Okay, how many of you have seen a support vector machine before? Okay, so all of you have seen it. How many of you have seen the derivation of the dual before? 2. Okay, so maybe let's just derive the dual. Okay, it's not that hard. Okay, so let us go and derive the dual, and actually, I mean, deriving the dual also gives you some more insights. So let me show you. Let me also give you a few more insights about how things work in SVMs as we derive the dual. Okay. So the standard way to derive the dual of such optimization problems is to use the KKT conditions, okay, and write the Lagrangian. So I think Pratik talked a little bit about this, but you know, we don't need a lot. It really you need only very minimal. So I'm just going to directly write the Lagrangian. Okay. So the way you write the Lagrangian in this case is the Lagrangian is a function of W psi. I'm going to introduce some dual variables. I'm going to call them alpha. For the first constraint, for this first set of constraints, I'm going to introduce alpha. For the second set of constraints, I'm going to introduce beta. Okay, so these are all new dual variables, and the Lagrangian looks like this. Summation of alpha I 1 minus I minus dot xi plus b, okay, and minus summation beta si. Okay, so these alpha i's are for the first constraints, beta I for the second constraints, and this is how the Lagrangian looks like. And the KKT saddle point conditions simply tell you that if you take the gradient of the Lagrangian with respect to all the variables, it must vanish. So it will be a saddle point because it will be minimum with respect to the primal and maximum with respect to the dual. Okay, so let's first take the gradient with respect to W of the Lagrangian and set it to, and this must be equal to 0. Okay, and if you take the gradient of the Lagrangian with respect to W, set it to 0, then you get W. This doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. So you get here, you get W minus yi xi alpha I summation I going from 1 to m this must be set to 0. Okay, so this leads you to the first non-trivial conclusion, which says that your weight vector must be expressible as this. It must be a linear combination of your data. Okay, and this in fact is a very powerful statement, because it says that in whatever space your data lies in, your weight vector will only be a linear combination. But at the same time, it also turns out that there is a very powerful limitation of any sort of method of an SVM type method. There are certain concepts which it simply cannot express because your weight vector cannot leave the span of the data points. Okay, so I can talk to you about this. There are some fundamental limitations of support vector machines, and we did some work on that. Okay. The other thing you can do is take the gradient with respect to with respect to psi, set it to 0. Oh yeah, and there's also the b. Okay, so let's take the gradient with respect to psi and set it to 0. So you get psi I, you get c minus alpha I minus beta I must be equal to 0. And one of the properties of when you're introducing these dual variables, one of the properties of the dual variables is they must satisfy this condition. The alphas and the betas must be non-zero. Okay, since the alphas and the betas are non-zero, what you can conclude from here is that the alpha I must satisfy this condition. Clear? Because they are between beta I must be non-negative. Correct, and which means that the alpha I must lie between 0 and c. Then let's take the gradient with respect to b of the Lagrangian and set it to 0. So the gradient with respect to b is simply alpha I yi summation I going from 1 to m. This must be equal to 0. Okay. So now you have these three conditions. First, that your weight vector must be in the linear span, alpha I must be between 0 and c, and the summation of alpha I yi must be equal to 0. Now you take this condition that the weight vector must be written as summation alpha I xi, plug it back here, and also the fact that ci minus alpha I beta I must be equal to 0, and the summation alpha I equals 0. So you take these two conditions, this and this, plug it back here. Okay, if you plug this condition back here, these terms disappear. C times this will disappear, and this will disappear. Okay, these three you can verify for yourself that these terms disappear. And what you will be left with is just terms which involve w and alpha, and now you plug in w equals summation alpha I xi, just plug this back in, solve, you will get the following. The Lagrangian will reduce to the dual, which will look like this. It will be 1/2 alpha transpose H alpha minus alpha transpose 1. Okay, so what is H? H is basically the matrix where Hij is given by the inner product between xi and xj. Okay, times yi by j. Okay, and this is an m by m matrix, and you just have to crank the handle, plug this in here, and crank the handle. You'll get this. Okay, and then you want to minimize this subject to the following constraints. The constraints you already know from here, which is this and this. Okay, and this is called the dual optimization problem. Okay, and the dual optimization problem has certain structure which is very, very interesting and useful. So the first thing that to notice is that the dual objective function is quadratic, which is not very surprising because the primal objective function is also quadratic. Okay, so the dual objective function is quadratic, the constraints are linear. Okay, such an optimization problem is called a quadratic optimization problem. Okay, and there are multiple efficient ways of solving this. We will look at one very popular way next time when we talk about SMO. Okay, but before we conclude for today, just one thing I want to finish up by mentioning is that while people talk about SVMs, they all go and talk about how, they all start from kernels and they talk about how kernels are so powerful and so on and so forth. But actually, if you start from here, the only thing to notice is that this entire discussion, in fact, everything that we did so far, including logistic regression, you can just assume that this dot product is a fancy dot product. Okay, that's why I always insist on. So if you remember at the beginning, I told you that I will never write x transpose y. I will always write xy. Okay, and the reason for that is simply because whenever there is this, whenever you see this x times x dot product with y, you need not think about a Euclidean dot product. Think about any arbitrary dot product in any arbitrary space, and the entire math will go through. There is nothing in there which prevents it from going through. So next lecture we'll talk about the consequences of that, how that is useful and how that helps you build efficient and more complicated classifiers, and we'll also talk about how to solve this optimization problem. Okay? Good. Questions? Okay, let's meet on Tuesday.
Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.